Thank you very much, Professor Holly, for that very kind introduction. It's great to be back here at Mount Royal. It's been 10 years ago where I graduated from the broadcasting program here. It was great. I loved my time here, and today is a day to reflect, and there's lots to reflect on. There's so much historical significance in what we are remembering today and what we are celebrating. And in my discussion today, what I want to kind of focus on, what my theme kind of is that, is this even the same country? Because when you look at from the times of 1907 in the early 1900s, when the first immigrants started arriving here in this country from Eastern Asia, and up until 1914 with the Komagata Maru incident, it doesn't even seem like the same place. It doesn't even seem like the same country, because the country that we know of today, Canada, it's totally different, and that's kind of the theme. This day is about not only this incident, but also about reflecting upon our own Canadian history and with other members from different cultures. One thing I always love to share, because it's sometimes a surprising fact, it's not a surprising fact for this crowd, but my great-grandfather, Sardar Janda Singh, he arrived on a ship in 1907 to British Columbia, where he spent time working on the railroads. He spent time picking berries. He spent time with the Khalsa Divan Society at that time. And so it's a story that's very near and dear to my heart. He was one of the first 100 Sikhs to come to Canada, and his name is published by the federal government in a few years ago, almost like 8 to 9 years ago. The federal government at that time published the names of the first 100 Sikhs. So that it's a story that is very personal to me. But in all of that, there's this whole other chapter of the Canadian story that happened many, many years later. And I'm going to just touch upon that briefly, because my parents came to Canada in the 60s. And from then on, all the way to where we are now, even in those 40, 50 years, the amount that Canada has changed, it's fascinating. So that's what we're reflecting on. That's what I'm talking about. Is this the same country? I was born and raised in Brooks, Alberta. I was born in Wetaskiwin, raised in Brooks, Alberta, and then came here to Calgary to go to school, and now I've been fortunate to work all over the country. My dream, I've been asked to talk a little bit about my own personal story for my career. My dream was always to become a hockey commentator, and I had no idea that this was even possible, but my parents said, go for it. You're young, and give it a shot, and let's see what happens. And if it doesn't pan out, you can always change. But, the funny thing is that when I reflect upon my childhood too in southern Alberta, growing up in a town where there was no other visible minorities, in a small town with just 10,000 people, and I think about it, like, how did I even make friends being the only turban guy? Well, it was actually hockey that was universal. I was talking with my friends about last night's game. I was playing hockey with them, and for a moment they forgot that I looked different, or that there was any difference at all. So if I reflect back on that, sports is something that's so universal that brings us all together. You fast forward to after my Mount Royal education, and I was working at CBC as a local reporter, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation had this wonderful idea to do something multicultural and to do something diverse, where they said, well, Canada's favorite pastime is hockey, and so why not introduce this to different cultures? So they introduced broadcasts of Hockey Night in Canada in Mandarin and Cantonese and Punjabi. And at that time, it was a pilot project, and they had planned on doing this for a few games, and that's what it was. We did the Stanley Cup Finals, the 2007 and 2008, when Detroit and Pittsburgh played each other the first time. And it was such a hit. There was There was media attention all over the country, but not just in Canada, all over the world. And we were making front page headlines in India because people were surprised that, wow, how is another language, another community thriving in Canada? And so that's what I want to reflect on. I'm going to keep touching on this briefly here. That is this the same country? Like we talk about, we've learned here about this incident and what happened with those immigrants who came back then in the early 1900s, and you reflect on what Mackenzie King was saying at that time. The Prime Minister of Canada for 22 years, Mackenzie King, was this guy who I have no reprehension of saying that he was totally racist. I mean, this guy's policy, he was the same guy, he was 5 university degrees, he was a PhD, and he was the guy who sent 22,000 Japanese Canadians into internment camps despite having all of his legal advisors and everybody surrounding him saying that these guys are of no threat at all. So that's what our history is. But now you look at it and all of a sudden it's 2007, 2008, and Punjabi is being broadcast on, hockey is being broadcast in a different language. And for one of these communities that was, in the early days, the Canadians, the government was trying to banish these people, prevent them from coming. Is this the same country? It's fascinating. So, our show, I learned a lot of things from working on Hockey in Canada and Punjabi, and one of them is that Punjabi is now the 3rd most spoken language in Canada. You have English, you have French, and you have Punjabi. And then you have Chinese, 4th, which is a cluster of 12 languages. But where did we come from? It's fascinating to reflect upon that Canada was this unwelcoming country at this time in the early 1900s. And if you think about it, this show that we've had on CBC for the past 7 years now, and thankfully Rogers is continuing it on, and we're going to be on Omni now. But what CBC started, people were like, well, why have this? What's the point of having multicultural programming? Well, what we learned from doing this is that new Canadians who are arriving to Canada today, all of a sudden when they're at work, they're talking to their colleagues, they didn't have much in common, but now that they're able to understand hockey because of this show in Punjabi, they're able to talk about last night's game and they have more of a camaraderie at work. That's some of the feedback we've got. We've received feedback from grandparents who say that, they're born in India, Pakistan, and the kids who are born here, there's a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier, there's a technology barrier. But what's being said is that, the kids love to watch hockey, and because of this show now in Punjabi, we understand the game, so we're sitting together and watching it now every Saturday night. All of a sudden we're hearing feedback that 3 generations in one household have something that's binding them together and creating a bond. And grandparents, I had a brief story in Toronto. A over 90-year-old mother came she was walking with a walker, and she was wearing her traditional Punjabi suit, but over top she had a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. And she came in with her grandchildren, and she came up to, and it was this meet and greet event where we had some fun prizes and events, and we were signing autographs, and I got up to meet her because I was like, wow, tusi inni bird avasthas tusi aa rahe, like you're coming in such old age to meet us. Thank you, we're so honored. And she was emotional, she was teary-eyed, and she said to me in Punjabi, she said that up until we started watching your show, my grandkids never sat with me, they never talked to me, I felt like they hated me, I felt like we had nothing in common. And all of a sudden I've become a hockey fan, a Leafs fan, and now we love each other, we're always talking. And she goes, your guys' show changed my life. This is what Canada has become. What's amazing is, I don't understand how this happens. Like if you look at Mackenzie King's PhD dissertation from back then, in the early 1900s, it was titled Oriental Immigration to Canada. And his quote, he was arguing against Asian immigration, his quote was, "Canada should remain a white man's country, and that's believed to be not only desirable for economic and social reasons, but highly necessary." That was our Prime Minister back then saying that to all of Canadians, to the rest of the world. We have those quotes, yet here we are today. You fast forward 100-some years, and how does that same country go from having such a racist Prime Minister to now where Canada is the multicultural example of the world? There is no other place you know, I have so many people come and ask me that, oh, would you guys have been able to do this in another country? And I say no. If you go, would we have been able to have Hockey Night in Canada and Punjabi in America, Hockey Night in America? Nobody else in the world is even ready for something like this. Even in India, the Sikh community, the Punjabi community, they face so much persecution. They're such a minority there. There's so many problems. Yet here, it's able to thrive now. This whole revolution is so fascinating to me because I kept asking myself when I was thinking about what am I going to say, it just kept coming in my head. Is this even the same country? It doesn't make sense. It's unbelievable how much it has changed. So, you know, what I've learned though is that sports is something that sometimes people brush off, and it's just like, oh, okay, well, those guys make their millions, and you know, it's a waste of time. Sometimes there's that sentiment, but take a look at the Olympics that happened in Vancouver in 2010. Just remember how Canada was at that time. Over 85% of Canadians, Canada's population, over 85% of people watched Sidney Crosby score that gold medal in that gold medal game. That 85% sample includes Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Jewish people. It's everybody together. They were rioting in Vancouver, but in Surrey they were doing Bhangra and they were celebrating the Canucks when they were, you know, in the Stanley Cup Finals. Sports is something that is very fascinating in the sense that it doesn't matter. If you're cheering for the same team, I don't care who you are, jump on board. Let's wear the same jersey. Let's cheer. It brings people together. And it's a very powerful universal force. And that's something I've learned. And I think that more than anywhere in the world, Canada is the best example. And hockey is something that's such a big fabric of Canadian culture. And I think that this is just such a great example to the rest of the world that you can get along. Look at what's going on everywhere in the world today, whether it's the Middle East, you have Palestine, Israel, you have the conflict in Syria, you have, you know, there's always Pakistan, India stuff, you have Russia, Ukraine, you have right now China and Hong Kong. But why doesn't the world look at Canada and be like, you know what, everybody can live together, you can all get along, and you can be prosperous, you can have economic success, you can have spiritual freedom. Whatever, this country has proven that it doesn't matter how you look. If I was a kid from Brooks, Alberta, wearing a turban and I have a foot-long beard, I can still strive to be a Hockey Night in Canada commentator because that's what this country allows me. And that's the freedom that we have here. And the fascinating thing again, is this the same country? It's so hard to believe that that's what was happening back then when Mackenzie King was saying we must, this is his quote from in 1938 from Mackenzie King's diary, the Prime Minister of Canada said, we must seek to keep this part of the continent free from unrest and from too much intermixture of foreign strains of blood. What? You know that $50 note? Mackenzie King is on that $50 Canadian note. I don't want a $50 Canadian note in my wallet ever again. I'll take the 10s, the 5s, and the 100s, but not the $50 note. That's what I have to say today. That's what I have to share with you. That Canada, it's a fascinating history. It's a fascinating story. How much it has changed, but this country has become the example for the rest of the world, and what a beautiful thing it is. Thank you very much for your time.